Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good to be back here again, and I'm honored to be sitting next to such a visionary leader here. So, a leader that stands at the confluence of science, governance, and visionary policy. A man who wears many hats, in fact, and wears them all with grace, precision, and purpose. So, Dr. Jitendra Singh, he's not just a minister, he's the catalyst of change in the truest sense. From steering India's science and technology revolution to modernizing governance to ushering in administrative reforms that touch the daily lives of millions, Dr. Singh brings with him a rare blend of scientific insight and political foresight. A physician by training, a scholar by spirit, and a reformer by action, he is the Union Minister of State for Science and Technology and Earth Sciences, as well as Minister of State in the PMO Personnel, Public Grievances, Pensions, Atomic Energy, and Space. And under his leadership, India has opened the gates to private space exploration, revolutionized civil service transparency, and amplified the voice of innovation across sectors. He doesn't just talk about ease of doing business, he's enabling the ease of doing science. So once again, sir, thank you so much for joining us. Sir, may I ask you, India is pushing aggressively towards becoming a global leader in innovation today. What do you see as our most promising areas of scientific leadership in the next decade?
No, thank you, Yasmin. At the outset, I must thank you for a very kind and a generous introduction, and it's put a huge amount of burden on my shoulders to live up to all the good things that you have said, and I hope I live up to the expectation that you have built in this room among all these august audience. Having said that, now, so could you just repeat your question?
So how are we becoming a powerhouse in innovation? Some of the most promising areas.
Yeah, I think at two levels. In the last 1 decade, due to the enabling milieu provided by the policymakers, by the political dispensation of this country, science has become a way of life in every Indian household. And B, for the first time, there has been a possibility of realizing the full human potential that we had in this country. See, we never lacked human resource. If you go back to the archives, you'll see the pictures of Sarabhai carrying some of his saman on the carriage of his bicycle. So we had talent in abundance, we had potential in abundance, we had the aspiration, we had the urge to work, we had the passion. We had some of the world-class brains in this country, right from the dawn of independence. But what was possibly lacking was an enabling milieu which is to be provided by the political dispensation, by the policymakers, and that incidentally happened only after Prime Minister Modi came in. And for the first time, technology, innovation not only has received esteem, it has also gained the confidence to live up to the global benchmarks. Now again, a very simple example, you would realize that ISRO, for example, if you're talking of space technology, was born in the year 1969. Now if you go back to the archives of the media houses, 1969 is the year which is remembered as the year when the first human being landed on the surface of moon. It was Neil Armstrong, an American, who made that famous statement, "A small step for man, a giant step for mankind." And we were just being born. But today, we have reached the south pole of moon before anyone else, which means we had the potential, we were held back, and once this was unlocked, we could also demonstrate the capacity of having a quantum leap or making rapid strides. This has happened only the last few years.
Yes.
And similarly, even in other sectors. Now, for example, I'll just give you, because I think it's easier to speaking to an assorted audience, it's easier to simplify by talking through similes and instances. We were always about 10, 15 years behind the rest of the world. As far as our technology was concerned, as far as the innovation was concerned, I think, again, a very simple example. The most talked about presidential election in the USA was that of 1960. Because very dramatically, a young man called John F. Kennedy, just 40 years old, turned the tables on a veteran called Richard Nixon. It all happened because he was an extraordinary orator, a very handsome young man, a lot of charisma around him. And he caught the imagination of the young America. And everybody was taken aback. But he could demonstrate all this by the way of the TV debate, which happens between the presidential candidates over there. But just look back in 1960. Yeah. Over here in the capital city of Delhi, you got to see the first Chitrahar somewhere in 1970. Yeah. By which time they had already moved over to a color television. So now it's not so. As I said, in the case of space, you have reached the southern pole before others. You are, in fact, ahead of many other nations in many ways. Like, for example, we are among 4 or 5 nations in the world who have institutionalized, formally launched a quantum mission. Yes. So hardly any nations. We are among the very few who have at the government level rolled out a biotechnology policy called BioE3, which means biotechnology for environment, for employment, and for economy. Because we have now developed that temperament, the mindset to prepare ourselves in a futuristic manner for tomorrow. Yes. Because this is a considered view among the economists all over the world that the next industrial revolution is going to be the technology-driven revolution, just as the last one in the 1990s was IT-driven. And we are already into it.
Yes, we are.
In fact, we were, and I think the best evidence again exemplifying that is that we came out with the first ever DNA vaccine for COVID and gifted it to the world. Yes. Now, I don't know how much would the audience here realize is the significance of this also emanates because being a medical professional, the world never thought of India as a very serious nation as far as our healthcare practices are concerned. Even at the social level, if someone falls sick, they just wait for 3-4 days, and if they get well, of course, the mother's blessing, they don't get well, Pishle Janam ka karma, so they have homemade placebos. So a country which was not taken seriously even for its curative health practices or therapeutic health practices is today being recognized as a leader in preventive healthcare. Look, it's a huge, huge departure if you see from that point of view. And we have come up with a host of vaccines after that COVID vaccine. Now we have the HPV vaccine for the cervical cancers, which is quite rampant in this country among the adolescent girls particularly. So what I'm trying to say is, and that has so evidently established a reputation of India that the perception of the world about India has also changed. If you look back just about, and not very far, just 1 decade back, somewhere around 2013, 2011, many of the youngsters who went abroad felt hesitant even to introduce themselves because they would not be taken very seriously. Yeah. And the country was known more for corrupt practices and scams and scandals rather than anything meaningful. But today, if our youth goes abroad and introduces himself or herself as an Indian, his or her rating in the employment sector goes up, which is evident from the fact that even youth going for Pakistan have started introducing themselves as Indians. Yeah. Because their facial features do not betray that. Exactly. So what I'm trying to say is, A, domestically, it has given us self-confidence, it has given us esteem. B, in the outside world, it has risen our stature, changed the perception about India. And that's been possible because it's been 10 years of a very laborious technology-driven thrust in every area. Rightly so, because if you have to move on from here where we are, they have no option, but it's going to be technology. Yeah, you saw even in the Operation Sindhu.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think in a way, every cloud is accompanied with a silver lining. I think the silver lining is that we could demonstrate through those 3 days what all we had done in last 10 years, because nobody could have actually imagined that we now had in place. And all this technology was developed, the TOTs, the transfers of technology, the development of technology was done only in the last 1 decade. You could defuse all those drones hovering over your skies and not a single one causing damage. Yeah, exactly. So in a way, in fact, the person behind the Akash mission, one of our scientists, says he himself did not know it will prove so proofless. So I said, it's good that you tested yourself. Yes, exactly. So I think now the world is evidently being demonstrated, showcased our potentials, our talents.
Yeah, I think I so agree with you, sir. The talent was always there. It was the right kind of intent and purpose, that push that was required. And the last few years have been a manifestation of that. So thanks for sharing that. So how about balancing R&D indigenously with international collaboration, especially in areas like AI and quantum science or space exploration?
See, now, in the times to come, increasingly, it's going to be a very single world, a global world. So very little demarcation between what is domestic, what is international. But yes, of course, you have a point. Being indigenous gives you self-reliance, gives you confidence, gives you the confidence of not being dependent on others and rather making others dependent on you. And I think the journey in that direction has already started. Like, for example, now for 22nd, we have this Axiom 4 mission plan for the time being. And the suggestion to have one of the Indians accompanying the crew came from that side. When somewhere a year or so back, Prime Minister Modi was engaged in bilateral with the then President Biden. That time the discussion came that we could have one astronaut from India. And incidentally, we were already training 4 for the Gaganyaan, Nair, Rangat, Krishnan and Shubhanshu. And 2 of them were zeroed on because they were already into this. So that itself is a recognition of the fact that no longer we are looking for collaboration from outside. The outsiders are also looking for collaboration from us. And no longer India is a follower, as I gave you the example of television. Rather, India today beckons others to follow her. So there is, and now we actually relate at an equal platform. The other day somebody asked me what is the difference between Rakesh Sharma's voyage and the upcoming voyage by Shubhanshu Shukla, because Rakesh is also a very good colleague and he was around here a few days back and he was the first one to go up there in the space. But that time our space program was very much in infancy. The government thrust was very little, the prioritization at the level of the political disposition was very little. So it was more of a bonhomie demonstrating the cozy relationship between Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union and India. It's no longer so. Shubhanshu is going to be one of the most important of the crew because he is A, going to be pilot, and B, he is going to perform some very important experiments which have never happened in the past in the space, related to life science, related to human physiology, or how does your faculty, how does your cognitive functions get altered in microgravity, or when you are made to look at the TV screen for a very long while or a computer screen. Then also he's going to experiment on the survival potential of living beings there. He's carrying some of those organisms which are capable of living in extreme conditions. Then he's also going to experiment in some of the plant seedlings. And all this has been again indigenous. Yes. These kits have been provided. I'm glad I'm also associated with that department by the Department of Biotechnology. And we were, I think, I said we should get formally wedded to each other. So we have actually finalized an official MOU between the Department of Space and the Department of Biotechnology, which is something, unheard of. Yes. And I told the scientists there, so I said, one day we are going to have a new area of specialization in medicine, which will be known as space medicine, space physicians. And tomorrow, in one of your conclaves, you might be interviewing or engaged in a conversation with a space physician. So we have already started moving in that direction. So it's all indigenous, the kits are indigenous, developed indigenously, and the person performing there also an Indian, which was not so earlier. Yeah. And the cues that we get, like the cues that we are getting from Chandrayaan 3, are being awaited by the rest of the world as well.
So we are leading the way now already, I feel, rather than following others on the path.
We started that.
Yeah, we started. How about ISRO becoming open to, private sector or private players now? How do you now envision the future of space exploration, sir?
No, I'm glad you asked that because that doesn't give me any hesitation to say that this would not have been possible if we did not have somebody like Mr. Modi as the Prime Minister, because such decisions do not happen without the cognizance of the top. And most of the political dispensations are comfortable living in the status quoist position because they have to go back to people every 5 years. They don't want to risk their, return back. And the bureaucracy also functions comfortably in status quoist. But then when we actually had been realizing that if we have to move on from where we are today, the demarcation between the private sector and the public sector has to go away. I mean, India, there is sometimes a casual gup-shup mood when you see the morning walkers and you tell them India's landed at Chandrayaan. Okay, sahab, kya hua? NASA to kahan pahunch gaya? But they never realize that NASA never depends on government. Yeah. So those countries which have reached a certain level have never depended on the governments. Nowhere in the world can you progress beyond a certain level if you are only or solely dependent on government services. And when this realization, of course, this realization had been lurking, but we didn't have the proper quarters to heed that. But when this was put across the Prime Minister, he allowed us to open up, and the results are miraculous. Just about 3-4 years back, we had single-digit startups in space. Today, we have more than 300. Our space economy was just dismal till about 4 years back. Today, we stand at more than $8 billion US, and the pace of ascent and pace of progress is so fast, so rapid that in the next 8-10 years, we hope to go up by 5-fold. That means almost 40 to 45 billion US dollar. So space economy is going to be a very important component of the India's future economic growth. So that's that has happened because of the engagement of the private sector. Exactly. Because otherwise we were constrained of the resources. The Sarabhai's picture is actually, I think, a very visual demonstration of how constrained were the resources then. And now we have also, this year only, the declaration has been made to open up the nuclear sector. Now, something which is never thought of, never imagined. Even the experts working in the Department of Nuclear sector were reconciled to the fact that they would function in the wheel of secrecy for the rest of their life. Even the nation, the people also thought that, look here, this is a sector which doesn't open up. But now we have, because now, as I said, we are not only looking for that global pedestal as we move from economy 10 to 4 and then hope to go up to number 1. But our aspiration level has also risen, and we have started following the same strategies. So if we move on and move up from where we are today, this is the strategy we have to follow to live up to the global benchmarks. And I'm glad that there's also a gradual change of mindset. We no longer drive satisfaction and saying, look here, I'm number 1 university in the country, I'm number 1 institute in the country. So we have suddenly, and in fact, I personally go, wherever I go, I try, to persuade that. Let's ask myself, where do I stand vis-a-vis the best in the world? And that's how we are actually there. So unless there's a very healthy now synergy of aspiration, ambition, and also the potential. And the demarcation between the private and the public, and unnecessarily for this, because, see, we had a legacy issue. We had inherited a feudal, system from about 200 years of a colonial rule. So there was a huge gap between the private and the public sector, which didn't happen in the Western nations. And there was also a certain amount of skepticism. Like, for example, the public sector always thought of the private sector as a black marketers. Yes, have the choro chakke business. And the private sector always thought of the public sector as bribe takers. I then, when we initiated this about 10 years back, I sat with a combined group, and I said, look here, now if you board a bus, you don't know who's sitting next to you. Chor hai ke, thug hai ke, devil hai ke, saint hai. But the moment the bus breaks down, the tire gets punctured, the driver says, look here, gentlemen and gentle ladies, now I am going to be in the driver, the rest of all will have to push the bus. Then you don't tell the person sitting next to you, "Bhai, you are a devil, don't put in here." You want him also to put in his might. So if you have to reach the destination, each one of us has to learn to live with each other. The goods and bads have to be exchanged and improved upon, and we have to synergize each other's not only efforts, also each other's potentials. And I'm glad that now that change of mindset has happened. And that's also given another awakening to the youngsters, more so to their parents. Gradually, parents are a little late to awaken. That Rozgar does not mean only and only Sarkari Naukri. The way the startups, came up from just about 350 to now rank 3 in the world today, 1.75 lakh, is also a testimony to that.
Yeah, I think I so agree with you, sir. I think it's no longer time to work in silo, and that's something we have understood. The collaboration is going to actually take India leap forward and multifold. So thanks for sharing that interesting part. So today's conference is focusing a lot of how AI is transforming education, our economy, governance. If you could take us through a bit on how do you think is automation and AI impacting governance today? If you could give us some examples, that'll be great.
No, of course, AI is a great facilitator. It saves time, saves energy, but one has to be intelligent enough to learn how to use artificial intelligence. Otherwise, you are at the risk of your intelligence getting hijacked. And now, just to give you the examples of governance, I'll tell you, we have developed some very good success models in governance which are actually being emulated by other countries.
Oh, wow.
Like, for example, our grievance system, which is called CP grams. We have, when this government came in 2014, the total number of grievances or complaints being lodged across the country with the government was just about 2 lakhs. Now that number has gone up to 26 lakhs. And when I said that in an audience like this a few months back, one of the smart boys got up and said, इसका मतलब कि आपके खिलाफ शिकायतों की संख्या बढ़ गई. Then I said, नहीं, इसका जवाब तो बाबा गालिब 150 साल पहले दे गए थे, जब उन्होंने कहा कि जब तवक्को ही उठ गई गालिब क्यों किसी का गिला करे कोई. You lodge a complaint where you know, otherwise you stop the chase also.
Yes.
So we have been prompt, and that's because we made an optimum use of the AI. Now our 95% of the disposal happens every week. But then why I said we have to learn how to use it. Only last year I told the secretary responsible for this department, I said, look here, we have developed a model which, representatives from countries like Myanmar, Mongolia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka come here to study what is it all about. In fact, just 2 weeks back we had a delegation from, I think, Africa also to understand what it was all about. But I said, still, my observation is that our disposal is 95%, but most of those whose complaints have been disposed of go back with a long face. So I'm known for all these khurafati. So he said, what does that mean? I said, they don't seem happy. And in the Western world, there's something called happiness index, which is now being discussed. So then I said, no two words in English language mean the same. The disposal does not mean that he has to be happy. Because the person who comes there would say, why I'm not in her place. I'm more talented than her. I'm more articulate. So what do? I process the complaint or the grievance to the concerned department. They tell me, look here, she has all the other reasons to be there where she is. You are not yet prepared for that. But I don't get convinced. So we introduced last year a human intervention in the AI. Now, AI intervention is something which is talked about very fancifully these days. It sounds very romantic. AI se hai, sab kuch AI se hai. So I think time is not far when we look for human intervention in AI. And we did that. Last year, we started a human desk. So I said, after disposal of every complaint, a human being would speak to the complainant. कि भाई साहब को तसल्ली हुई संतोष नहीं साहब क्या तसल्ली जहाँ जाओ यही that is invariably the first response in spite of the disposal. तो फिर आप समझे नहीं साहब ऐसा है कि ये इसका दूसरा विकल्प भी हो सकता है, ये भी हो सकता है, या कुछ कोर्ट से लीजिए लेकिन नियम ऐसा ही है. So now it's kind of an engaging in conversation and counseling. So I think that is called, to what I would describe it as a hybrid model.
Yeah.
A hybrid model of AI and the NI, or the natural intelligence, which is of course not an abbreviation, I'm using it. So similarly, another practice which we have used dueling these tools is again being emulated across the world, again in relation to governance, is the digital life certificate. Till about 10 years back, there was a practice of elder citizens being expected to produce a certificate of being alive every year. So they had to consult a doctor. So I said, death certificate I have known because I worked in different hospitals, and when a person dies, his relatives are more keen to have the death certificate because they're not because they are grieving for him, they are vying for the gratuity and the insurances. So पटना का कोई पेशेंट या बिहार का होगा, दिल्ली में एम्स में जाएगा तो कहेगा वहाँ से टेलीफोन आएगा, ओ भैया वो डेथ सर्टिफिकेट ले आई हो, वो जरूर ले आई हो. ओके, तो मैं कहा वो तो हमने सुना था जब प्रैक्टिस करते थे, लेकिन ये लाइव होने का, so that's not very it's somewhat inhuman. So we introduced biometry.
Yes.
But then last year or about 2 years back, about 1.5 years back, we realized that the lifespan in India is increasing progressively, and after the age of about 75 or 80, even the fingerprints, the biometric marks are not as trustworthy or reliable. So we were, I think, among the first in the government sector to have introduced face recognition technology. So you just look into the camera of your mobile, and that confirms your face and your iris with your Aadhaar, and within about 40-50 seconds, the certificate is provided at the desk of the banker. And when we introduced it, I said we'll also make a record of being the first having used it for the good purposes, because earlier or mostly it was being used by the crime world. So I think if all these technologies have both sides to it. Sure. So how best to use it? And AI, of course, in our medical domain, for the cultures. What took 3 days is now taking 3 minutes. The specificity has increased, the sensitivity has increased. But how best to use it, to put it to use, would be a challenge again. And I think that's why I said a good optimum hybrid model is something that may be more popular in the times to come.
Exactly. We cannot let go of the human touch that's needed to kind of guide how AI is being used or adapted in, I think, any function. And that's what we need to be careful.
And the other part is the integrity part.
Yeah.
So AI cannot compromise for your integrity. So that has to be, exercised by the human handler.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Thank you so much, sir. So, final question to you. You have such a broad and complex portfolio. What motivates you or inspires you to personally continue advocating for science, for innovation, and for governance reforms?
No, nothing. I think one has to be a good learner. One has to always be curious, and just having the urge to find out what is so. Even if his desk is placed there, why it's so? I think when you walk down, it comes in the way. It can be. So if you keep, toying with your ideas, you naturally develop that. When I went to, for the first time, to Sriharikota way back, and Dr. Radhakrishnan was the chairman, also happened to be a friend. So in the middle of night, he said, "Doc, I'll take you to a site where even my faculty is prohibited," because there was going to be a launch happening next morning, and that was midnight. So when I went there, I said, "Radha, I try to learn one new thing each day. But what I learned today is that one has to be as eminent a scientist." He's a world-known scientist, known to be father of Mangalya. So one has to be as eminent scientist as you are, or someone as jugadu as I am, to reach this place. But why so? And from that day, this idea started toying on me, that why we have kept all this secrecy and, So if you are a good learner, because what you and I learned in our school or college is only our basis.
Yes.
It could be like basic sciences, but rest of it is all outdated, in fact. So whether it's the life sciences, the other streams, so one has to be a good learner. One has to have the urge to learn. So if you are so, then you enjoy learning. And the only risk is that you then also start looking for captive audiences, like one you have provided me now. So that sometimes you have to guard against, to keep on talking to those who are not actually interested in listening to you.
No, that's you're learning and passing on the learning. So that's the inspirational part about it, actually. But thank you so much for sharing that. One last question, a rapid fire question for you. If you could solve one national challenge with the use of science, what would that challenge be, sir?
I think most of the issues confronting not only a nation per se, the mankind per se, will ultimately have to meet technology solutions. And technology in one way or the other was happening even in the earlier times. Maybe it was not developed to this extent.
Yeah, the pace. Yeah.
And the immediate challenge, if you see politically and from the point of view of the nation, is how to ascend further. Very soon, in next 3-4 years, we would be number 3 economy. Then going up, number 2 and number 1 will be a little challenging task. And there, our accomplishments and our cohesive efforts, both technology-driven transformation, are going to make a difference. And in a single sentence, I would say that the technology transformation or technology-driven transformation is going to herald India's ascent to that pedestal.
Absolutely agree with you, sir. Very, very forward-looking thought that if we want to leap there and move on from number 3 to 2 in first position and being the biggest, largest, most progressive economy in the world, we have to use technology as a fuel, as a foundation for our growth. So, sir, on that note, thank you so much for giving us this time. It was very, very inspirational to hear from you. This is a true example, ladies and gentlemen, of humility as a leader. After managing such complex roles, being so humble and still being a learner and still being so curious at heart. So I think that requires a huge round of applause for sir, everyone. Thank you so much, sir. Please.